Young Sheldon is full of moments that completely contradict the Big Bang Theory. From Sheldon's dad supposedly cheating on his mom, to his childhood bully who was never actually a bully. I'll be going over every major plot hole in Young Sheldon, starting with one of the most overlooked. So here's the thing about Young Sheldon that a lot of people don't think about. The Cooper family's home base for almost the entire show is Medford, Texas. The house, the high school, Mima's place, the church, all Medford. And that sounds totally normal until you remember that the Big Bang Theory heavily associated Sheldon's early childhood with Galveston. Sheldon says he was born at Lawrence Memorial in Galveston. He remembers seeing Santa at Baybrook Mall in Galveston when he was 5. The Big Bang Theory placed his roots in Galveston, and young Sheldon built his world in a completely different fictional East Texas town without acknowledging the difference for an entire season. The show just quietly set everything in the wrong place and hoped nobody would notice.
All right, Tam, I decided I was going to make you a real Texas dinner, barbecue chicken and brisket.
Thank you.
Now the writers did eventually try to fix this. In season 2, we get a backstory explaining that George Cooper Sr. used to coach football in Galveston, but he discovered a recruiting scandal, reported it, got fired, got blackballed from coaching anywhere in the area, and had to move the whole family to Medford to start over. And that works, sort of. Sheldon and Missy were born on February 26, 1980, in a Kmart in Galveston, which lines up with what the Big Bang Theory told us. George coaching there lines up. George serving in the army before that lines up. The family relocating after a career disaster is a reasonable explanation for why they ended up in a different city. But that fix introduced its own fuzziness, and the show never fully cleared it up. If the Coopers moved from Galveston to Medford at some point during Sheldon's early childhood, then the timeline of when Sheldon first knew certain people gets murky. The Big Bang Theory says Billy Sparks put a Mexican peso up Sheldon's nose when Sheldon was 5, and young Sheldon doesn't start until Sheldon is 9. So technically, the move could have happened before any of that. But the show never pins down exactly when the family arrived in Medford, so you're left guessing. The Wiki's own plot holes page flags this as a separate continuity issue on top of the original Galveston problem. They patched one hole and left the edges rough enough that a second one is still sitting right next to it. And if you think getting Sheldon's hometown wrong is a big deal, wait until you hear what they did with his entire education. Across the Big Bang Theory, Sheldon's school history gets laid out in
Where are my safety goggles? No, I have a lab later. And risk eyebrow lice? They don't just like head hair, Tam.
pieces. In one episode, he says before college he was in 5th grade. In others, he fills in the rest. College at 11, graduated college at 14, doctorate by 16. It's clean, it's fast, and it fits the freakish genius who skipped everything image that adult Sheldon loves to project. Young Sheldon complicates that entire path. Instead of going from 5th grade straight to college, young Sheldon puts 9-year-old Sheldon in high school. Not college, high school. He attends Medford High alongside his older brother Georgie, sits in regular classes, deals with regular teenagers, and slowly works his way through the system.
Onomatopoeia. Words that imitate sounds. Cthulhu. Snip. Writers shouldn't make up words.
By season 1, episode 19, he's already sneaking into college-level physics by auditing Dr. John Sturgis's quantum chromodynamics class at East Texas Tech, which feels like the show is trying to split the difference between the Big Bang Theory's skip-to-college version and showing him physically in a high school building. He doesn't actually graduate high school until season 4, episode 1, when he's 11 years old. And even then, the show gives him a full emotional breakdown about whether he's ready for what comes next. His own twin sister Missy has to tell him it's okay to be scared before he can even process moving forward.
You're scared everything's gonna be different, so what do we do? I guess be scared and do it anyway.
After that, seasons 4 through 6 walk through his college experience step by step. He does freshman orientation, takes philosophy classes, studies under professors like Sturgis and Linkletter, goes to Germany for an academic program, and eventually gets recruited for graduate school. Young Sheldon still gets him to college at 11, so that part holds. But the 5th grade straight to college version from the Big Bang Theory is gone, replaced by a high school arc that adult Sheldon apparently never mentioned. The reason this matters beyond just the dates don't match is that Sheldon's intelligence and how it moved him through school is the entire foundation of his character across both shows.
Sheldon did so well, he broke the curve, turning your A's and B's into B's and C's.
It's why his family makes sacrifices, why he leaves Texas, why he ends up at Caltech, and why his relationships with basically everyone are strained in specific ways. When the prequel adds an entire chunk of schooling that the original show never mentioned, it makes you wonder what other parts of the timeline got quietly rewritten. And that suspicion pays off almost immediately, because the next plot hole isn't about dates or cities. It's about a person. Specifically, a person adult. Sheldon called one of his childhood enemies who, based on everything young Sheldon shows us, was never really his enemy at all. Billy Sparks. In The Big Bang Theory, adult Sheldon puts Billy on his enemies list and tells stories that make him sound like a classic childhood tormentor. Billy put dog poop on his bike handles. Billy shoved a Mexican peso up his nose. If you only watched The Big Bang Theory, you'd assume Billy was this aggressive kid who made Sheldon's life genuinely miserable. Young Sheldon paints a completely different picture. In the pilot, Billy does scare Sheldon with a chicken and calls him Doofus, which feels like classic bully introduction material.
Hey, Doofus!
Good girl.
A couple episodes later, Billy's connected to the Coopers getting salmonella from eggs, which adds to the "this kid is trouble" setup. And in Season 1, Episode 12, Sheldon writes in a school assignment that Billy threw a chicken at him. So clearly, young Sheldon is already building the narrative that Billy is a villain. But after those early episodes, Billy never actually becomes the threat adult Sheldon described. Instead, he's just kind of there. He's a weird, slow, harmless neighbor kid who wanders through Sheldon's life without any real malice. He plays Dungeons and Dragons with Sheldon and Tam. In Season 2, he interacts with Sheldon during a paper route and comes across as more clueless than cruel. In Season 6, Sheldon literally tutors Billy, who manages to score a 68 on a test and gets moved up to 7th grade, where the narrator tells us he stayed for several years. By Season 7, Billy and Missy are close enough to throw a party together at the Cooper house. The wiki for young Sheldon doesn't dance around this either. It straight up says the show's events appear to disprove Sheldon's claim that Billy was his bully. So what happened? The most generous explanation is that adult Sheldon exaggerated. The Season 7 finale reveals that the entire show is framed as a memoir Sheldon is writing as an adult, which means every story has been filtered through his perspective and his memory.
Are you writing your memoir or a fantasy novel?
For your information, the word memoir comes from memory, and these memories are mine.
So maybe a neighborhood kid who scared him one time with a chicken and called him a name got inflated into a childhood bully over the decades because Sheldon is dramatic and holds grudges. That's a believable explanation if you accept that Sheldon is an unreliable narrator. But here's the problem with accepting that. If Sheldon's memory is unreliable enough to turn a harmless neighbor into a bully, then you have to start questioning everything else he said about his childhood, including the single biggest claim he ever made about his own father. This is the plot hole that changed the most between the two shows. In The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon says he was 13 years old, home on spring break from college, when he walked in on his father with another woman. That experience traumatized him so badly that it created his famous 3-knock habit. He knocks 3 times on every door because he never wants to open a door and see something like that again. It's one of the most important pieces of Sheldon's backstory, and for years, fans took it as fact. George Cooper was a cheater. End of story. Young Sheldon spent multiple seasons making you believe that version was true.
I never talked to my father about what I saw that day.
Seasons 5 and 6 built up a slow, suspicious relationship between George and their neighbor, Brenda Sparks. They're at the bar together. There's emotional closeness. Mary notices. The audience notices. Everything pointed toward George and Brenda being the explanation for Sheldon's story. And then Season 7, Episode 4 pulled the rug out from under all of it. What actually happened is that Mary came home from Germany and surprised George by dressing up in a German roleplay outfit. She was pretending to be a woman named Helga. Sheldon walked in, saw someone he didn't recognize in bed with his dad, panicked, and spent the rest of his life believing his father had cheated. He didn't. It was Mary the whole time, the affair that haunted adult Sheldon for decades and shaped one of his most recognizable personality traits was a misunderstanding involving his own mother in a costume. This retcon does way more than fix one awkward scene. It fundamentally changes who George Cooper is supposed to be across the entire franchise. The Big Bang Theory's version of George was rough. Adult Sheldon's stories painted him as a drinker, a cheater, and a father who didn't appreciate having a genius son. Mary's stories in The Big Bang Theory weren't much kinder. Young Sheldon spends 7 entire seasons showing the opposite. George is flawed, absolutely. He drinks, his marriage gets rocky.
Doesn't make me feel better. I just mean I'm not his wife. Don't make it right, but talk's all it was.
He considers jobs in other cities that would uproot the family, and he's not always emotionally available. But the show also presents him as a father who coached football and cared about his players, held his family together through financial stress and Sheldon's constant academic disruptions, and was frequently the calmest, most reasonable person in any room. The wiki describes him as a loving father and often the calm voice of reason. There's even a moment later in The Big Bang Theory where adult Sheldon receives encouragement from a video of George giving a halftime speech.
In fact, we're definitely not going to win this one. And if we do lose, you need to know that doesn't make you lose.
Which suggests the franchise itself eventually came around to the warmer version of George that young Sheldon built. And the wiki raises another angle that makes this even messier. It suggests that some of Mary's more negative stories about George may have been influenced by anger and grief after he died, which means the prequel isn't just contradicting The Big Bang Theory, it's offering an explanation for why The Big Bang Theory got George wrong. The people telling his story were too hurt to tell it fairly. So now you've got a prequel that spent 7 years actively rewriting the show it was built to set up. And that creates this weird situation where the more you watch young Sheldon, the less you trust anything adult Sheldon or Mary said in The Big Bang Theory. Which brings up two more characters whose young Sheldon versions are basically unrecognizable compared to their original The Big Bang Theory descriptions. The wiki for George Cooper Jr. includes a line that should honestly be famous at this point. It calls Georgie the greatest source of inconsistencies between The Big Bang Theory and young Sheldon. That's not some fan on Reddit being dramatic. That's on the character's actual wiki page, and it's completely accurate. In The Big Bang Theory, Georgie barely existed as a character. He was mostly just Sheldon's crude, antagonistic older brother who showed up occasionally and served as a punchline about how the rest of the Cooper family turned out. Young Sheldon turned him into one of the most developed characters on the show with a genuine coming-of-age arc.
You saying I'm the manager?
You think you can handle it?
Yes, sir. I will make you proud.
Great.
He drops out of school. He gets a job working with tires. He meets Mandy at Meemaw's laundromat. He gets her pregnant. He becomes a father to Cece. He marries Mandy in season 7. And then The Big Bang Theory itself fills in what happened after George died. In season 11, adult Georgie explains that Mary was a mess, Missy was a teenager, and he had to take care of both of them while shielding Sheldon from the family burden. Young Sheldon ends shortly after George's funeral, so it doesn't dramatize that long-term sacrifice, but it makes Georgie's The Big Bang Theory confession about stepping up feel earned in a way the original show never set up. The narrator in Young Sheldon's season 1 episode 12 even mentions that Georgie married his first wife at 19, which foreshadows Mandy.
By the power vested in me by the great state of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride.
There's a small detail in season 7 episode 9 where Georgie consciously starts speaking more properly in front of his daughter, which the wiki connects to why the adult The Big Bang Theory version of Georgie has noticeably better grammar than the teenager in Young Sheldon. That's how different these two versions are. The show had to plant a specific scene to explain why the same character talks differently across the two series. The depth of Georgie's story in Young Sheldon makes the shallow The Big Bang Theory version feel like it belongs to a different franchise. And then there's Tam Nguyen. In The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon refused to speak to Tam for over 20 years. The reason was that Tam had promised to move to California with Sheldon and be his roommate, but then Tam stayed in Texas, got married, and never left. Sheldon held that grudge for decades. When Tam finally reappeared in The Big Bang Theory, after more than 20 years of silence, it was treated as a major emotional moment.
Sheldon, so good to see you.
Tam?
It's been a long time.
But Young Sheldon's season 7 shows us what Sheldon was actually like right before he left for California, and it doesn't match that grudge story at all. Sheldon is excited about Caltech. He's looking forward to leaving Texas. He asks Tam for one last lunch at the library, and the whole vibe is a kid who's so wrapped up in his own future that he barely registers what Tam is planning to do next. The show never builds the kind of deep "we're doing this together" pact that would justify cutting someone out of your life for 2 decades. The showrunner even suggested in interviews that the promise may have been something Sheldon assumed, rather than something Tam actually agreed to, which reframes the whole situation. The Big Bang Theory made it sound like Tam betrayed Sheldon, but young Sheldon makes it look like Sheldon was too self-centered to realize the promise only existed in his own head. Both Georgie and Tam share the exact same fundamental problem. Young Sheldon told their stories in so much more detail and with so much more nuance that the simpler, the Big Bang Theory versions stopped making any sense. When Georgie was just a background brother, nobody needed his personality to be consistent. When Tam was just a name Sheldon wouldn't say, the grudge didn't need a believable setup.
When I moved to California, what did you do? I stayed in Texas. I can't believe this guy.
But once you give them 7 seasons of actual screen time, you can't unsee the gaps. And that leads to the single biggest plot hole in the entire franchise, the one that sits above all of these, because the writers acknowledged every piece of it and still couldn't make it work. In The Big Bang Theory, Season 1, Episode 11, Sheldon says he was 15 years old, studying at the Heidelberg Institute in Germany, and his mother flew back to Texas to help his father after the house slipped off its cinder blocks during tornado season. That's a specific story with specific details. Sheldon is 15, George is alive, and a tornado caused damage. Now here's where it gets complicated, because The Big Bang Theory also says George died when Sheldon was 14, which means The Big Bang Theory itself has a contradiction. If George is dead at 14, he can't be alive at 15 for the Germany tornado story.
You're welcome to stay with us as long as you need.
Thank you.
You can have Sheldon's room. Just don't tell Sheldon.
That math problem existed before Young Sheldon even premiered. What Young Sheldon did was try to tell its own version of the Germany and tornado events, and in doing so, it fixed one part of the contradiction, but broke another. Season 6 sends Sheldon and Mary to Germany for a summer research program after Dr. Sturgis puts in a good word with a colleague at the University of Heidelberg. While they're in Germany, a tornado hits Medford and destroys Mima's house. George, Georgie, and Missy deal with the damage back home, while Mary and Sheldon are overseas. Season 7 opens with the aftermath, the family regrouping, and Mima eventually moving back in with the Coopers because her house is gone. So the Germany and tornado pieces are all there. But Young Sheldon sets this whole sequence when Sheldon is 13, not 15. That actually fixes the dead father problem. George is alive during Young Sheldon's Germany and tornado arc because it happens before he dies. Season 7, Episode 12 is when George finally goes. He gets a coaching offer from Rice University. The family debates the move. Mary tells Sheldon the Rice decision isn't about you. And then Principal Peterson and Coach Wilkins show up at the door and tell Mary that George had a heart attack.
What's going on?
Mary, we got some bad news.
Where's George?
He had a heart attack.
He's gone. Sheldon is 14, so George being alive during the Germany trip isn't the issue anymore. Young Sheldon solved that by moving the trip earlier, but now the age doesn't match. The Big Bang Theory said 15. Young Sheldon shows 13. And you can't have both. Some fans point to the memoir framing from the Season 7 finale, where we learn adult Sheldon has been writing the story we've been watching this whole time, and they argue that maybe Sheldon just got his age wrong in The Big Bang Theory. He said 15, but he was really 13. He misremembered by 2 years. And sure, that's technically possible, but once you go down that road, you can't stop. Because if Sheldon's memory is unreliable enough to get his own age wrong by 2 years during a major life event, then literally anything he ever said about his childhood could be inaccurate. Billy might not have been the enemy he described. His dad might not have been a cheater. His school timeline might be wrong. His grudge against Tam might be based on a promise that was never actually made. The memoir framing from that finale turns every single plot hole in this entire video.
You've got to be kidding me. Well, are you writing your memoir or a fantasy novel?
These memories are mine.
Into something the show can technically wave away by saying, well, Sheldon just remembered it wrong. But that's not a fix. That's the show admitting that none of this has to be accurate because the narrator was never trustworthy in the first place. And at that point, the plot holes aren't solved. They don't go away just because there's an excuse available. They're just permanent. If you want more Young Sheldon, watch this video right here.